Okay, welcome back to our board meeting of the Clay Township Board. We'll carry on with information items. Our next discussion is the fire construction project, an update. Now, Doug, do you want to kind of frame this, or should we have Mr. Bosma frame this discussion?
Well, there's a few things that we need to talk about, and I guess the first thing is the bidding process, the bid.
Project delivery process.
I know, but it's the design, bid, and build. And there's a difference of opinion as far as whether we should then do the bid or just the design and build.
Right.
So what I will do, I will let Brian discuss it because the memorandum he sent to us.
Right.
And then we can go from there. How about that?
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Trustee, members of the board. I expressed my opinion on this at our last meeting, and I'm not the policymaker here, you all are. So I put together more materials than you probably cared to receive. I've told Doug I really tried to make them the balanced ones. I have some very imbalanced ones as well, and I'd really tried to make it balanced. I know Matt has a lot of experience on design build and favors that delivery system. I tend not to, for this kind of project, although we've all talked about it, we'll figure this out. You want to do it that way, we'll document it that way, we'll make it work. I don't think it's the most efficient means of delivering this project for a couple reasons, and I'll tell you why. First, it's not one project, it's three. It's three separate projects. They're specialized projects. It's not a CVS where you're popping it up and there's a set of plans. While the two stations may be identical or very similar, the public safety buildings have their own set of requirements, and then the command and maintenance center it's a custom building. So the primary difference between the two delivery systems is who the architect works for. So in the traditional design bid build, you all, technically the building corporation, but really, in actuality, you all hire an architect. There's an iterative process, it means back and forth. You decide, they propose, you say no, you say don't like this, we can only build it for X, don't like the color, you go through all those things. And they settle on a concept with you, and they design it, and they bring it to you for approval. Once you've approved it, it's put out to bid, and the constructors, general contractors, build what is designed. If there's always a
Work change?
no but it's the retainer, the 10% retainage. Yeah, no, not retainage. Somebody give me the right now. The problem fund. You hold 10%. Contingency fund. The word was totally escaping me. There's always a 10% contingency fund. You try to build it to 90% of the budget, and then that 10% is there, and almost all of it will get sucked up, always, all right? And you try to live within that budget. There are circumstances that occur, and this is what Matt was coming up with, there are circumstances that occur that are unanticipated. And the builder will say, this wasn't in the design, and they come back to you and the architect and say, we got a $15 or $20 or $75,000 problem, what do we do? And you tell them what you're going to do. You're going to spend the $75,000, or you're going to cut a portion of it, you're going to value engineer it to reduce the price. And hopefully the project is all done. Now, in the design build process, it's very different. You all hire an architect and then also appoint two more people that have to either be an architect, an engineer, or a licensed contractor or employee of a licensed contractor. Those three are the technical committee. Those three put together, and it's usually the architect who leads it, and you hire them. They put together what I'll call 30% documents. It's specifications. It's the equivalent of what you'd need for permitting. It's general concepts, footprints, square footage, general building specifications. And then you put out that group, and you have input with that group because you appoint them, puts out a request for qualifications, out public notice to the world. People come in and say, okay, we're qualified. The technical committee looks at it and says, okay, these 10 are qualified, at least 3 must be qualified under the statute, or, you know, there's special provisions if you don't have 3 qualified. But you qualify 5 or 8 or whatever it is. Then that technical committee gives to those selected design builders these general specifications. The design builders generally hire an architect themselves. They might have one on staff. Most of the large construction firms here will hire somebody to design to the general specifications. It could be one of the positive things about it, you could get 8 different proposals for 3 different buildings. So you got 24 different things to look at and try to pick one that you like the best, okay? When they respond to that request for proposals, they give 2 responses. They give their design, here's our design, and here's our price. Technical committee takes the designs and they score them, okay? And they score the submitters as well, all right? They put a 94% score on somebody, or they put a 50% score. It's a 100% score. They're outstanding. It's perfect. And then after another notice at which all the responders can show up at, you open envelope number 2, okay? And the adjusted price for each entity is the quality score that they were given times the secret price they submitted, all right? So if you have a $5 million proposal from a 100% contractor, their adjusted price is $5 million. If you have the same $5 million proposal from a 50%, nobody gets 50%, but just to give an example, from a 50% scored individual, their adjusted price is $2.5 million. They're not going to build for $2.5 million. So they're going to be off the table eventually, but you got to start with them, okay, and then work your way up. For this kind of project, I find it cumbersome. I think there's too many variables. And frankly, for a public entity that has to make these decisions in public, and the technical committee is a public body also, I think it's cumbersome. And I think it's more involvement on your all part during the process, because you can negotiate. After you even pick the best one that you want, that you think is the best value, you can continue to negotiate with them. And I've been involved in these projects. You will continue to negotiate with them, because they won't necessarily say, if you say you're a 90% contractor and you got a $5 million price, we're going to pay you $4.5 million. They can say, I don't think so, because we don't make any profit in that. So you got to negotiate with them. They'll say, well, we cut this and this and this. You go, okay, we'll do it for 4.5 if we cut these things. So for my money, this kind of project, this kind of threefold project, and I've been in great big ones, as big as, I got an $850 million one that we're trying to get online now. Biggest one I've personally been involved in was the library, Indianapolis Library, $105 million. And I've been in teeny tiny little.
That was design build, or that was just.
Yeah, we were involved in the litigation afterwards.
That would be an example of a failure.
Yeah, we were involved for 3 years in the litigation afterwards. So I've been involved in teeny tiny construction projects like $750,000 expansion of a garage for a public entity. And some of those under design build, they can work. I just think that's more difficult in this type of project. Now, that's my opinion, okay? And you're the policymakers, and we will design contracts and work with the architect that's selected, if it's design build, as the technical consultant to put together the best process that's protective of you all. The last point I made in my memo to you is, if you do design build, if there will, I guarantee you, no matter what project delivery system you pick, there will be changes, there will be alterations in it as it proceeds. It's just the way it always works, because designs aren't perfect, or they forget something, or they don't anticipate a shortage of product, or forgot that, nobody remembered, including all of us, that, you got to have an exit here, or whatever it is. There'll be a change. So in the design, bid, build, you all are in charge of how to deal with that change with your architect. In the design bid, as long as they stay within the general specifications that you all have published, the builder and the builder's architect, with no loyalty to you, make that decision. So if they got to cut something and they change something you can't see, that an architect would say no to, if it was your architect, because that was not our spec. You got to have somebody on site to detect these things, which leads me to conclude, in my experience, that if you're going to do design build, you need to have, not a full-time necessarily, but at least a part-time
Inspector.
on-site inspector that's generally an architect or an engineer. So I think by the time you're done with it, the cost savings that you might be able to shave on design build for 3 separate projects, because of 3 separate projects, you're going to end up, I think it's going to be about the same cost. I think it's be more complicated under the design bid method. Just an opinion. And there are projects where it works wonderfully and is quite appropriate. If I had my druthers, I'd pick the traditional method, get your architect here, you all settle on what you want with the other participants that have to participate, and then you set a budget, you turn around, you bid it. If the bids come too high, you all value engineer it down, make it smaller, shorter, less pretty, whatever it is, and you make those decisions and not somebody else. Happy to answer questions.
How do you get around, and I appreciate it, you did send a ton of stuff, and I read it.
I really apologize for it, it was too much, but I
No,
want to
no,
be fair.
But
it's up to us to read it.
I read it in the afternoon, so I didn't fall asleep.
I don't necessarily disagree with anything you said. And I don't think what you were saying was biased really at all. Your opinion is
Thank
what
you,
it
I
is.
appreciate that.
My biggest my grief with design bid build is that it can, in my experience, it does get harder to control cost at your own, and it ends up, there's going to be change orders. There's going to be change orders we're going to look at, and we're going to say, if you had an inspector on site, it wouldn't even get to us, because they'd say, it was in the bid package. But when there's no inspector on site, the contractor can say whatever he wants and fabricate the story of, well, we had sandy soils. That's all, every Parks Department project ever. Well, the soils were sandy. Okay.
Right.
You didn't know that ahead of time. You didn't do any geotech. But my biggest grief is that you can't low bid, and I just think without lowest and most qualified, it eliminates good companies. If you get 2 bidders, one bids $1 million, one bids $1.2 million. The $1.2 million is the better firm, and they're going to deliver at 1.2, whereas the $1.1 million firm is going to change order you to death, and it's going to come in at 1.5. And that's my biggest hiccup. Just because I've done it I've just seen
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah, as long as so it's lowest bid received from a responsive and responsible bidder. So you can eliminate some people and say you're not responsible, but that's kind of a big leap. You have to have solid evidence. It's not the most responsible. It's
Can
lowest
you,
responsive and responsible.
can you advertise when it goes to bid? Is there any way to advertise with qualifications? You can write the RFP or the bid.
The specs, yeah.
That
You-
you must have delivered a fire station or public safety building of this nature. Or,
You can score them. You can score them to weight that. But you know, as long as you pointed out an important item, and that is if the constructor is responsible, not most responsible, but responsible, and they have responded to the bid specifications accurately, you're required to take the lowest one unless you have a good reason not to, like they screwed up a project. And
or they're currently in litigation over.
They're in
similar-
litigation, their references won't respond. I mean, we check those kind of things, and if you know, the Ps and Qs are in order, then you can't say, well, we like X firm, which is, you know, $500,000 more, better than Y firm. Only can you do that if Y is deemed not responsible for some bona fide reason. So you can't pick. And really, there's some difficulty in picking under the design bid also, because the statute says you do this multiplication thing, and you aren't required to pick the low number, but if you aren't picking the low number, you're subject to questions about it from the public and elsewhere. But you can, and you can negotiate after the numbers calculated. You can negotiate with the low bidder, lowest adjusted price, and you work your way up.
All right, I'm gonna stop the argument about it.
Okay, I don't want to argue with you, Matt, because I know.
No,
there's
I'm saying
plenty-
I'm just gonna relinquish to doing a design bid build. But here's design bid build.
Okay.
What you're saying, because it just sounds easier, it's what the majority wants, and it's not worth hanging this up over. What I would like to see, or what my thoughts are, if you'd hear me out on this,
Sure.
is I'd like to see us put out an RFQ for a consultant for both for 44 and 40, for 43 and 44 as one project, because they can take. We've got plans that I think most engineers would say are 80% complete. They're not. Most of the sheets aren't stamped. I don't think there's proprietary. They can go off of them. The fire chief has looked at them. He likes them. But I'd like, and then the consultant and the fire chief can say, okay, here's what we've got. We've got a model. The fire chief and the fire departments, and I've spoken to every fireman on duty at both those fire stations, love the model. They like what they see. The designer can put it on paper, site design. I'd like to see that as one RFP for a consultant that we can look through and pick, because they'll put together a package, lead engineer, lead architect, surveyor, all that, and we can look, and that doesn't need to be, that's performance-based, so we can pick whatever firm package we like, or whatever team we like. And then and then put that to bid. Hopefully it comes in within our proposed budget.
Okay, could you say that again, Matt? Because I'm not exactly following that.
I think if we release an RFP for a designer to do this, to hire, because I'd like to see teams. I really don't want to see one firm come in and say, like, American Structure Point, who is a huge firm. I don't want that. I would not like to see them come in and say, we're going to do it all, because I think you lose accountability in some areas.
Okay, you couldn't do that. I mean, what you can do without, well, we might be able to figure out a way to do that. But here's what typically happens. You hire an architect or an engineer, and they design for you, and then that goes to bid for construction.
But you have to hire the engineer. I used to write these RFPs.
You have to hire an architect. Is
Right.
that what you're saying? Yeah. So the statute allows you to hire an architect, without an RFP. Now, you can also do an RFP.
Well, I'm saying I would like an RFP.
Okay.
I mean, I think it eliminates us from like making it look like we've used this firm forever, let's use them again. I'd like to see 5 or 6 teams put a package together, and we can look through their past performances and pick a team that we
Okay,
feel.
the team is the difficulty. That's where I got a little bit of a.
No,
trip-
I mean,
trip
there's going
just
to be a
little bit.
prime, and then the prime's going to have subs to do. There's going to be a category exclusion document that not all firms do.
On the design, a prime and a sub on a design, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
It's not going to be on construction, because you're going to bid the
No,
construction,
I'm
so you
talking all
can't
design.
pre-select.
Talking all design.
Okay,
We're going to say we want somebody to design this project. We're going to write out an RFP. We need this. Here are the documents you already had. You're going to have to, somebody's going to have to do a survey. So let's say Joe Schmo engineering firm comes up. They don't have a survey crew. They're going to hire a sub to do the survey. They're going to hire a sub to do the categorical exclusion for environmental, because they don't do that. They're going to hire a sub maybe to do any permitting or right-of-way staking that's needed. I mean, that's what I mean by, that's.
okay. So require them to put that team together in
Yeah, I want to
advance.
see what the prime's doing, which is going to probably do 80% of the project, the actual design, and then I want to see who their subs are. Because a lot, like, I mean, I've got a state RFP right here for, this is City of Elwood, 22nd Street, and it's, it requires a DBE goal of 5%, it requires someone to do environmental doc, topographic survey, and then, has requirements for, and I mean, I write these. I mean, I've written a dozen, well, probably 200 RFPs. So anyway, I'm just saying, one project. I'd like to see, instead of just someone just arbitrarily picking a designer because they like them, I'd like to see several teams that want this project and see some LOIs that reflect what each team wants. I just want to see, I don't want somebody thinking, and I don't want the public thinking we're giving a favor to somebody on this huge project. I mean, I want them to know we did our due diligence, and we asked for engineering firms and their sub-consultants to put together packages that we can look at, and then we can pick based on that.
Okay.
This is a lot of words for me saying I'd like to see the 2 fire stations, because they are very similar. They're going to require architectural changes to the building based on what people in the know about fire stations may see lacking in the current designs. It's going to take site design, but it should be a fairly quick design process. Then I'd like to see, and that I really don't, I think that's a 3-month design. I don't see anybody, I just don't think there's that much into it. Then when that goes, then we'll let that. This is just my thought. We put that to letting, and we find out how the bids come in. We'll have an engineer's estimate, and I think the letting has to be within 10% or of the engineer's estimate. I mean, the bids.
Yeah.
No? It's
No, I
different.
mean,
Different for buildings?
yeah, I mean, there's no requirement that you must bid within the engineer's estimate. I mean, the bids will come back at whatever the market bid is, so.
Okay.
And then if they're all 20% higher than what you thought, then you'd say, okay, well, we're going to start value engineering out something here because we underestimate. Hopefully, they're not that off, but, I mean, I've seen them where they are. They're high and low both.
Okay.
So there's no statutory requirement to that effect.
For municipal, I mean, because there is for, we just had to relet a project because nobody came in within the engineer's estimate for NDOT.
Okay.
But that's NDOT, so, I mean,
Yeah.
it's totally
So
different.
No requirement on local government. to-
Okay.
Let me ask something.
Well, can he finish because there's one more piece
Yeah,
to this.
then,
and then-
let me finish.
Okay, so
Then the second
you're-
piece of, what I'm saying is that way,
Essentially doing the 2 buildings together.
together is one project, because we get one bid. I mean, I think it's gonna be cheaper. I think somebody bids the same, if they're almost identical buildings, I think their orders are gonna be greater, it's gonna be cheaper supplies. And then once we get the bids in for those 2 buildings, we'll know how much money we have left in the coffers to hire another design firm to design whatever Matt, the fire chief, and Doug think is necessary for a maintenance garage and EOC center. I mean, because I think they're 2 definitely different projects. And one is a shell maintenance garage with a bunker type thing that requires a lot of underground utilities. It's going to require land acquisition, right-of-way, title work, whereas rebuilding on existing sites won't need all that. So I think it's going to be a more heavy, engineer-heavy project than the 2 fire stations are. So I guess what I'm saying is I'd like to see a request for qualifications for designers to do the 2 fire stations, and then put that to letting, then do a request for qualifications for whatever this conceptual, to do this EOC training, whatever that ends up being, and we'll have a dollar amount that we will know what we can spend on it to better aid the designer in building whatever it is we want.
Let me,
I'm sorry, I interrupted you from, because I
Well,
wanted him to finish the story there. so I
here's
can-
my
yeah.
experience. When I was on the school board, and it's a totally different thing, clearly, because we had an assistant superintendent of business. We had a full-time facilities manager. And those 2 guys, a majority of their time was spent on facilities and figuring out what to do with new schools. So they would put the package together, they would go out for presentation. And I can't tell you, about every other year, we would have a big dog and pony show from 7 or 8 invited architectural firms predominantly. Would come in, talk about their experience, talk about what their concepts were for this new school over on Shelbourne. We'd pick one. Then they'd partner up with a construction firm. And we would all feel comfortable about that. And then our full-time employees would work with these 2 entities to make sure that the school was built, designed and built within budget. And we didn't have to worry too much about it. We decided how much we thought we could spend at the suggestion of the business manager. Here, we have basically 4 laymen, and I, with the exception of Matt, who does this for a living. My concern is that we don't throw this on Doug Callahan and make this a full-time job. We've got to be very careful that we pick a process that is reasonable and not too time-consuming for Doug. And obviously, we're going to be involved, but I don't know about you, I don't have the time to pick fascia and, colors of dormers and where we're going to put the weight room and how thick the slab of concrete is. I know you do that, but frankly, you don't have the time either. We've got to make sure that whatever process we pick is reasonably easy so that this isn't a full-time job for Doug or any of the rest of us. Whatever that process is. This is my first venture on being, basically other than the Monon Center, which we turned over to the professionals and figured out how to pay for it, how to bond it. I want to do that the same way here to the fullest extent that we have so that the professionals can do it and hopefully within budget. And that is
I'd be disappointed to know
oversimplifying.
that there were a lot of meetings about picking fascia and color of carpet.
And thickness of concrete slab.
There were a whole,
Yeah.
there were a whole bunch
But
of
none of those involve
components
me. And my concern
Okay.
is that we pick the process that limits the amount of involvement from the 4 of
That's
us.
That involvement he's talking about, and you said there were meetings, those meetings were with the building, which one of these 2, I assume the building corporation? Or none of the 2 boards you talked about earlier were involved in any of the meetings?
Well, it was essentially turned over to the park board, which were the appointees of you all in the city, and they spent a lot of time making those. Somebody's got to make those kind of determinations.
I understand that, and maybe it's a fait accompli. Maybe we have to be involved in that.
I mean, it could, the
We're gonna
way
be.
it's set up, it could be the joint board. It could be the trustee and the mayor or their designees, and one of you and one of the city councilors or your designees. I mean, you all pick a designee and say, okay, you're doing it. Or you could do it yourself. So, but someone's got to pick. I mean, your architect will not, you don't want your architect to pick all your colors and everything else, and then for it all to go up and you go, holy cow, what has happened here? We don't approve of this at all. And actually, your architect, if that's who you end up working with, they won't want to do that. They'll
Well,
want-
clearly, the chief and his subordinates and maybe a committee he puts together. As long as it's within budget,
Right.